I don't know if they really care. All I really believe is the love that I receive. My only prayer would be, you just step forward for me, and it's not make believe. My one only prayer is that someday you care. My hopes, my dreams come true. Lots of thoughts and things that...
For this evening's session, great pleasure to introduce first of all Herb, who's a good friend of mine. And one of the first, I didn't meet him as a friend, I met him as a psychologist. And he was one of the first psychologists.
Are you ready to share with the group, Joe?
I'm sharing them. And one of the first psychologists that actually used the word love and mean it. And since then, the relationship, which did start as a form of meeting at a conference like this, has really grown and made me feel very strong by being associated in lots of ways and given me lots of strength. And I'm sure lots of people that he comes in contact with gives that strength too. I'm not going to say anything about his background in terms of his sort of academic qualifications and sort of experiences, but just to say I'm really, really pleased to have him here, and it's good that you're here, and I'm going to allow you to do the rest yourself, Herb. Okay, thank you.
I was a little surprised that, is this working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. A little surprised to see my name listed under this topic of living in the community. It's a word that often confuses me, and since I have about 2 social impulses per year, I feel uniquely unqualified to talk about that generally. On the other hand, this year's workshop 2 has turned out to be a type of community with parents and professionals and at least 1 or 2 people who use services. So I thought I'd give you a little report on what we've been going through. And one of the first things we talked about this year was the whole issue of language. And, you know, what are we calling people this week? And are they people with learning disabilities, learning difficulties, special needs, challenging needs, and so on. And what I think we came to some understanding is that all these terms are provisional, necessarily, because the people they apply to really haven't told us yet what that means for them. And it seems in most of the English-speaking world, the term disabled people has taken on the mark of respect that people with disabilities are saying they want to be called. But this is new and the movement's young, isn't it? And as things change, we're going to have I suspect we're going to see new terminology. In the United States, where we've had at least 40 years of really active and overt struggle around racial civil rights, we've gone from calling people Negroes to Afro-Americans to black to people of color. Most recently, we've been using African American. And there are a lot of people who criticize that, saying, you know, why can't those people make up their minds? Well, the reality is that African Americans, by any measure, simply do not have the power and status that white Americans do. Some here and there, now and then, but as a group, no. And so long as we have that struggle, we're going to have this confusion around the terminology. Eventually, if we get it right, those terms, there'll be some term to denote racial difference, but it won't be electrically charged. It'll just be a description. So I think that's what we're trying to do in this movement, and we're stuck until the inequality is finally removed, aren't we? So we're in for a bumpy ride. But I think this business about names is not trivial. If it wasn't Confucius, then he should have said, in order to know the truth, you have to know the right names of things. And so I think our uncertainty at the beginning of our group on what are we calling each other, what are the terms, reflects the fundamental uncertainty of where are we and how far have we gotten in this journey. And of course, disability issues have changed a lot over the last 50 years. As some of you know, right after World War II, all over the world, apparently spontaneously, parents banded together and demanded specialized provision for their children. And the impulse then was to find the best therapy, the best setting, the best segregated services we could get. Now, this happened at a time when most of the civilized world was really in love with technology. This was a time where we knew the atom bomb was going to bring world peace. We knew that automobiles would end pollution from coal-burning engines. Antibiotics would eradicate infectious diseases. And of course, new appliances and machines would make it so that you would be able to live in a maintenance-free home and earn a comfortable wage after 20 hours a week. And all that happened, didn't it? These are promises that have come true, or soon will. So that, you know, we also believed at that time that the new behavioral sciences, with a cunning little scheme of rewards and punishments, could remove difficult behavior effortlessly. And I think that dream is dead, I hope. But it's not dead so long as it's funded. So I hope we've come to that point in our history where we've started to recognize that the end point of pure thought is probably death, and that we're not going to think our way out of these problems, and that what we require is a new respect for the irrational, the intuitive, and the felt. And we are discovering that we need people who step out of the mold of what we'd created in the earlier parts of the 20th century, to remind us of who we really are and who we need to be for one another. If it takes a whole village to raise a child, I think it takes all the villagers to make a whole world. And we're belatedly recognizing that if we're going to create a world that's safe and sane. And I think now mainstream culture is turning to groups that they once rejected, not because they suddenly discovered nice, but they intuitively know they need this to survive. Because you know, I'm not the first person to suspect that possibly the planet is in danger. So one of the questions that it brings us to is, so what do these disabled people want? And last year's T-shirt, since one of the charming things about Marxism and capitalism alike is that it reduces all thought to slogans. Last year's deep thought was to go boldly where everyone else has gone before. It's a nice thought. I just don't think you're going to do it, frankly. And the simple reason for that is every time someone comes into or goes out of a group, it changes. And the weather in a room changes with the people in it. So by the time we get disabled people fully included, it's not going to be where everyone else has been before. It's going to be a new world for all of us, won't it? And what we're really working on, I think, is coming up with a new definition of normal. I think in the future, normal architecture won't include stairs, although it does now. In the future, we'll have a different etiquette. It won't be normal to be quiet in church or in nice restaurants. Oh, it's oppressively the case at present. We're going to have a wider range of what's going to be okay. In the future, it won't be normal to expect to provide seating for all your guests, that some people are thoughtful enough to bring their own chairs when they come to visit. And it won't be normal, as it currently is, to assume that people who are different want to be like everyone else. It may come as a surprise, but a lot of people with autism don't particularly want to lose that. People who don't hear don't necessarily want to. People who don't see aren't particularly jealous of those who do. And so in our group, we've been talking about things like, why do we get stuck on having people learn to tie their shoes when they could get Velcro straps or shoes that slip on, or even, what a concept, have someone help them tie them? But so long as we believe that you don't belong until you're independent, you're going to be trapped in a world where you're getting ready. And as one person in our group very radically suggested, maybe this person we're trying to teach to tie shoes wants to learn to take the bus. So why not start teaching people what they want to learn instead of what we think they need to learn? So I believe children need to go to special schools in segregated places if they're going to get ready for adult day wasting centers, and if they're going to get ready to live in group homes and hostels and behavior gulags. Those are useful places to learn those things. But the second parent movement, the so-called younger parent, have been saying, if you really believe our kids have something to contribute, if you're really going to believe they're needed, and if you really believe that they're going to get paid work or have a valued role and a necessary role in our society, then they're going to have to be in the regular places to learn the basic ground rules for that. So if you want, where you start is where you end up. So if we expect to see disabled adults living in their own homes and not in these gulags, they're going to have to be known and know their neighbors. So this is not a utopian view, by the way. It's already happening, and it's happening well enough and widespread enough for there to be new problems. And all new opportunities merely bring you a new set of mistakes you haven't learned yet. But in some ways, what I think we're really coping with in these situations where people are more in supported living, supported employment, supported education, what we're re-encountering are simply the old problems that all people have all had all over the world all along anyway. And basically, my experience of adult life has been that you have to make important decisions with inadequate information. You're always worrying about whether something's too much or too little. And a lot of life, for better or worse, is about almost or too late. And we're not going to get rid of that with technology. But what I hope comes next is an embracing of ordinary life with its ordinary problems. And I think a lot of the conversation in our group has been about so-called behavioral difficulties, are really variations of ordinary problems that people have. And in our group, we've also been talking about what it's going to take to create this brave new normal that we're hoping to see. And parents have been pretty clear. There's a lot of rhetoric about this partnership between parents and professionals. And the reality is those partnerships are never equal. For parents of so-called ordinary kids, professionals can make recommendations, but parents can say yes or no. But for so-called special kids, a lot of our professional suggestions become parental command. And I think we overestimate especially when you're comfortable, you overestimate the comfort of the afflicted. And so this idea of creating a new community is going to create some new problems for those of us who are service providers. If I'm working for social services and think that I'm supporting Lindsay or Osmond, I may think I'm working for those people, but the reality is I work for social services. And at the end of the day, you will be put, or I will be put, to choosing between my loyalty to them as a friend and my responsibility to myself as an employable adult. And that's an untenable position. So one logical place to start looking at this is giving financial control to the people with the disability. And this obviously is going to create new problems, but it's going to take away this subtle form of oppression, which isn't always so subtle. But people talk a lot about empowering, and that always makes me nervous. When people are going to give me something, I'm often deeply suspicious. And with good reason, but we're not going to talk about my childhood now. But one real form of power is money. But the other thing to remember is real power is not given, it's taken. And until disabled people start taking this power for themselves, it's not going to be real, it's going to be rhetoric. And at the moment, it seems to me, disabled people have to choose between two groups of helpers. People who are well-intentioned but untrustworthy, and another group that's exactly the opposite, where they're untrustworthy but well-intentioned. That was the laugh line, but we don't have to dwell on that. Okay. Some parents in the group are taking small and local actions for their sons and daughters. Some people are sitting on regional and national committees. Some people are sitting uninvited in local education authority buildings. You know who you are. And all of us have to figure out for ourselves which of these paths is the most useful for us to take. But essentially, I think our common denominator is that what we're trying to do is work to heal these deep divisions between parents, children, schools, administrators, purchasers, basically government. And some people are going to choose to do this really noisy and in a confrontational way, and other people are going to choose to do this very quietly and behind the scenes. But meanwhile, we need to respect that each of these strategies has some purpose for different people at different times. And I think one of the things we can do immediately is stop trying to change other people. And I mean not just disabled people, but the temporarily able-bodied as well. There's a profound impulse in human beings towards creating other people in our own image. And I think it's about learning to respect ourselves and respect the truths that other people have to speak, even when we disagree with them. And, you know, at that point of platitude, it's when I need to remind you that the reason I say a lot of this is that none of this is natural impulse for me. I am, by nature, severe to profoundly obnoxious. I like good fights. I'm quick to judge people. And I'm occasionally tempted to force people to see my point of view, because I realize that if they did, they too could be enlightened. And one of the things that I'm getting away from, but not entirely, because it's still a motto I really like, is, you know, had I been present at the creation, I could have offered several useful hints. So one of the parents in our group said something that I thought was fairly shocking. And she said, you know, you professionals don't know how to do inclusion. And so, of course, I asked her in my best therapy voice, tell me more. And she said, none of us does. That we all grew up in a society that was not inclusive. This is all early days for us. We're struggling as we go along, and we're all learning as we go along. And so I want to thank the people from Workshop 2 who have been building a place that I need to remember that. And also to remember that certainly for me, it's been a lot easier to judge. It's been even easier for me to forgive at times than it has been to understand. And that's the real barrier that I run into. And what I think we're all struggling here to do is to build a world big enough for all of us. So this is our last year here in this format, and this has been a place where a lot of us have made new friends. Some of us have found new courage, new strength. And we need to move on, but we also need to keep doing all of this. And being middle-aged, I offer advice. Don't do it alone. Even though I wish you could, you can't. And one thing that I keep coming back to in my understanding of change is that it all comes back to a relationship. That without a relationship with someone or something that calls us, the us that really is us, that calls us and when we get there supports us, that's the only way we can heal and change. And when we do that, it's almost by accident that we change the world. So, let's do that. Thanks.
In our group, one of the things we've been talking about is dreaming a lot. And I think my dream would be if I could have transported you all to my bedroom at 4:30 this morning. It might have shocked my husband a bit, but my thoughts were clear and I knew exactly what I wanted to say. Joe, it's a bit of a shock when you open what looks like a friendly, innocent programme to find yourself placed in between HerbLovett and John O'Brien. It might be everyone's dream.
mainstreams as well.
But to actually see it in print is a bit shocking. The thing that's given me the actual courage to stand up and walk from there to here is the fact that there are so many friendly faces in the audience, old friends and new friends, and I know that as a group you're non-judgmental, because we've been taught that over the last few days. So can you remember that, please? Thank you. Thinking about living in the community puzzled me a bit as well, because when I visualise community, I visualise buildings, towns and villages, a bit like a really nice advert, you know, the coffee advert where the new vet arrives, and that to me is sort of an ideal community that I envisaged. But really thinking about it made me realise that that's not what community is. I live in Rosendale, and that's where I live. My community is in Rosendale, but it's also in Stockport and in Liverpool and in Canada and in Boston and all over England, because my community is where the people are who care about me and I care about, and they're the ones who give me the courage to actually stand here. What I want to do is to share with you some of the, I suppose, experiences that families have generally. I hope I can use this machine. I've never used it before, and I'd like Richard to give me a hand if he would. Thank you, because that's what we're supposed to do. Reflecting on, would I not you? Could you press it? I'm not
The white one.
I'm not an organiser with these.
The white one.
Thank you. So what I thought I needed to do first of all was to sort of reflect, because I've been in this sort of confused state for quite a long time. Can everybody hear me? And I think the confusion began when services sort of entered my life. It was okay before then. And it felt a bit like I'd fallen down the rabbit hole and followed the white rabbit. Yeah. And I was the only one who didn't think I was in Wonderland. Because people were saying some really strange things that they thought made sense, and they didn't make any sense to me. So I thought back to what it had been like before for a team. This took some courage. This is me when I was 18, 1968. Wonderful year.
1968, you were at Bolton.
Thanks, Al.
68.
A lot of people weren't born in 1968. But I'm older than I look, and I was 18 in 1968.
I think I must have been.
You were a twinkle somewhere, I think.
Twinkle somewhere.
Yeah. But in 1968, when I was 18, it was good times. I wouldn't have been born at any other time. I went from being a mod to a hippie to a flower child, and so you change you remember, Paul? You change your fashions and your ideas weekly. It didn't seem to matter. I had some concerns about some of the things that were happening out there in the world. You know, I banned the bomb, but mainly because you got a lot of pot when you went on the marches and had a really good time. So it wasn't particularly serious. After this period, I decided to move into my next period, and this was the period of being Earth Mother, because I got fed up with having a nice time. And I got pretty serious about it, as you can see. Sorry. Thank you. Heidi's signing and I sign, and I wasn't. She said she's trying to. Okay, so this Earth Mother period was wonderful. Now, there's a government health warning with this picture. It's a really stupid thing to do. Don't do it. Any of you who haven't decided yet, don't. But if you're going to do it, so stop a bit before all this happens. Because the thing is, they don't go away. You can't sort of change your mind a few years later and decide that it wasn't a good idea after all. The other thing is, for those who haven't experienced it, when they get to about 11 or 12, they go to bed one night and they're visited by aliens. And they wake up the following morning and they don't speak the same language. If they speak at all. I think our youngest has just done A-levels in slamming doors and raising eyebrows. And we know nothing. So, but as you can see, we had 5 lovely children. And with the same hopes and dreams for all those children. They were no different, it didn't feel any different. But for one of our children, there was a difference. It wasn't the difference that we saw, it was a difference that was perceived by service providers and the service system. And that's when the confusion started. It was suddenly as if, as a parent, I had to rethink things. Because you sort of handed these babies and sent home, and they've survived, so I did okay, and I think that's what we all do. I think you should have a manual, really. But if you have a child who has any extra support needs, you have to gain all these extra skills. And some of those skills may be dealing with drugs, helping somebody who has epilepsy. I have a friend whose daughter needs feeding intravenously, and that's fine. I have another friend who has a child who uses oxygen all the time. So we have to learn all these extra skills, and when we've learned them, and then we say, could our child go to nursery, please? The answer is no, because people need training to do this. So there's that confusion. The other thing that happened for me and a lot of other families that I know really relates to the stuff that Richard did last night. And for those who weren't here, Richard gave us a history of how people with disabilities have been treated, a visual history. And when I'm talking to children in schools, I remind them that all the fairy stories, all the pantomimes, all the films, all the stuff that we teach our kids, every single time, the baddie always has some sort of an impairment. And that's the only knowledge you have as a parent, and it's pretty confusing because you feel love and you feel hope for your child, but you haven't got really the correct sort of information. The other, Herb mentioned getting ready, and that's the other thing that seems to happen. Nicola, who's the second of my 5 children, is now 24, and like all the others, she's been ready for whatever's happening from day one. Whatever's going on, she's ready for it. She might need some help to get there, but she's ready. The people who spent some time with her might agree. But to get ready, she needs an assessment. And she needs an assessment for everything. And these assessments take a lot of time and a lot of forest. We have a file full of assessments. These assessments don't actually seem to lead anywhere, but they do keep people happy. They keep social workers sort of give them something to do and keep them out of trouble. One of the things that happens on the assessment forms, and I've actually brought some with me if anybody wants to see them, because we're trying to get rid of them with 4 years worth. They start off talking about people's, they make good paper planes, they're a good shape. They start off talking about people's strengths and needs. And I don't think we think of ourselves in that way. And there are some peculiar needs, like you need to learn to work, or you need to learn to look at people. The last 2 columns on the page are outcome and date of outcome of the assessment. And I don't think they went that far in the training, because none of these have been filled in. I actually wonder whether some of the confusion I have is because I'm not trained, and that going on a training course of some sort might help, because that's quite often the excuse given to me when I'm puzzled about the response. I bung these slides in quickly before we started, so I'm hoping they're in the right order. Could you just flip onto the next one for me? At the conference, I didn't warn Judith about this one. We worked really hard, and I've met a lot of interesting people here and learned a lot from them. Can you just flick through this? Some wonderful people. As you can see, it's all hard work. One more. If you don't recognise these 2 people, that's Linda Shaw there, boogieing, and Kevin on the right. I think just want the next one. And again, please. Thank you. Right, this might puzzle you. I want to share something with you that I don't want to leave this room, okay? There's nobody here from the health authority, is there? Oh, right, good. Now, this is a secret, and I want your advice. This is an incontinence pad mounting, and that's my garage. Nobody knows where I live. What happened was that incontinence is not a subject we usually talk about, but if people have a need for help with their incontinence, what used to happen was that you went down and you collected what you needed when you needed it. Now, when things seem to happen okay and they make sense, I think most people who've had anything to do with services will agree that what happens then is they complicate it. They bring a form out or they change the form out, and the worst thing of all, the most frightening word I ever hear is reshuffle or restructure. So they restructured, and what happened was that you don't go down and get what you want when you need it. They deliver. You're assessed, you're assessed. And when they've assessed you, they delivered. Now, you can't stop this happening once it starts. Because you've been assessed. And if you try and stop it, then they take them away altogether, and that's the problem. There are 20 boxes there, and each box will last anybody over a month. You know. So what I've thought is I need to get rid of these, and I think there's a marketing guy here somewhere. We can think about it. Now I've got a couple of ideas, but I'd like to ask you your thoughts on it, please. This is from another angle. Now, I think it could become a tourist attraction. The other thought I have, there's a lady here who's just moved to Rothendale. Right, this is the plan. You just moved to Rothendale, so we don't know each other, so people won't think it's set up. You visit my house for tea, we met at the inclusion conference. You're drawn to the garage. Something mysterious is downstairs. You're drawn to the garage and you see this. You have a vision. Vision. You see tears coming from the boxes. It becomes a religious relic. And I thought, people can visit. We could make money on this. Right. Yeah, you could be the guide, and I'll share the profits with you. That's one thought. These are some of the other thoughts I've had. Lagging of pipes. I've already insulated the loft, but I couldn't get up there with the carpet. In this country, when it's warm, men take handkerchiefs and put 4 knots in. These will be, they're waterproof. It rains a lot. Right, I need to explain this to people who aren't from the north of England. This is a ferret restrainer. I don't know who the man is, but does everybody know what a ferret restrainer is? Because John's going to do a workshop on it tomorrow. Men in the north of England put ferrets down the trousers. And I have 5 children. It's okay. CD holder. They actually fit between the elastic sides. They just hanging back. That oven glove. I don't know if that's it. Could you try it? I've got hundreds of these. I don't know how many I've put in. All right, that's it. Okay. Now, thank you. So, if you've any thoughts on what else, because I think that probably will cover about 10 boxes, and they're delivering again in 2 weeks. So, if you've any thoughts, You could send them care of Marcia. Thank you. Okay. So this could be a marketing ploy. It could pay for inclusion. You know, it could pay to sort of get kids and supported and stuff. All right. The other things that happen are that language changes around people, as well as the assessments. And I think it must be really uncomfortable sometimes, well, all the time, to hear the way that people talk about you. My child became described as a list of needs, not as a person. She has a lot of gifts, and people who know her are quite aware of those gifts. The gift that her friends most closely value is the fact that she's the first at spotting good-looking blokes as soon as they come in the pub. She has a list of gifts. What happens is that she's not, those aren't used to describe her, she's as other people are. For example, and this isn't my daughter, this could be anybody. If I describe somebody to you as being, say Herb, no, I'm not describing Herb. I want you to meet somebody. Right, okay. He's double incontinent, doesn't speak, has some strange behaviours and uses a wheelchair. You know, you're not going to leap up and say, please pick me. Well, you might, yeah. Sorry, wrong person to ask. Mostly it wouldn't endear people to somebody. If somebody's described as somebody who's good fun to be with, smiles a lot, and in that way then people want to spend time with them. Just an example of how this sounds peculiar when taken out of context. Hiya, Heidi.
Hiya.
Okay.
Yeah,
Enjoyed the conference?
wonderful. Meeting loads of new people.
Don't overdo it. How do you fancy a bit of social integration tomorrow after the conference?
Oh, sorry, John and I garden.
That means you're going to be using your gross motor skills again.
Yeah, fine.
So you're going to be...
Fine finger movements.
And your hand and eye.
Yeah.
Well, this just gets in the way.
Well, I've got my timetable on me. Wednesday afternoon I've got social integration.
I'm on a group outing then. Well, what to fit it in? Doesn't it sound bizarre? The other thing is about assessments, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to give you some feeling of how crazy it all feels, and most families I know say that it gets crazy. And if you don't keep your sense of humour, you'll go crazy. But what I try and do is to turn things round to see how they'd be in what we call the real world. Because when I'm out in the real world and I say, oh, kids should be in the same school, people think I'm crazy. Yeah. And then they do these really weird things to our children. Yeah. Okay, so if we were being assessed, right, I've got a brochure here, and I thought it'd be nice if we've all got on pretty well, haven't we, over the last few days. And so as a group, I think we should not live together yet, but it might, although we do get on fine, and we spend some time together, but it might be nice if we had a holiday together. I know you shouldn't go in groups, so this is not too big a group, nobody would notice. So I've got this brochure for faulty tours. And I've looked through it, and there's some really interesting things happening. Apparently there's a hydro pool in every chalet, and there's a ball pool that we can use communally. There are lots of therapies in offer, lots of therapies, including aversion therapy, rebound therapy, trampolining. We can break into smaller groups and go out on buses. And could somebody just hold Maggie's hand a second? There's a snoozling. So we'll enjoy ourselves there. Now the thing is, that's not too appealing, but I really haven't time to ask you all, so I've booked. But when we get there, we've got to be assessed. The courier's called Miss Bottomley. So, you know, it might seem like a really interesting place to be, but there's no guarantee that we'll all get in. Can I advise that nobody wears a blue jumper? Apparently they don't like that. And anybody with green eyes needs to wear contact lenses.
Can I go?
You can go. You'll have no problem. That's how daft it gets. This picture is a craft centre that's recently opened near where I live. And the other day I was going down there because I owed somebody some money for a can of pop. And there's nothing happening during the week. That's how it was, half an hour after the story I'm going to tell you happened. As I went in to pay me money, my daughter was coming out, sitting in a wheelchair with a lady next to her who was a staff member I'd never met before, and a driver. This is where all this sort of came into my head. And I said, "Oh, hey Nicola, what are you doing here?" And this staff member said, "It's Wednesday afternoon and we do social integration." And there was nobody else around, so I thought that Nicola would want to come out with me. So I said to her that I was really pleased about this, and I hope that Nicola had been helpful, because she's really good at helping people to meet people. But she didn't get it. This is what's inside, well, mostly what's inside the craft centre. This is not a private shop where they sell just for those at the back. I don't know why people are attracted to these. But when I went in, just after Nicola had come out, the only people who were there were a group of a dozen older ladies having a really nice time, but they were having a candle dipping demonstration. So Judith talked to us about me being sure that if you wanted your dream to come true, you needed to be in a place where it might be heard. And without it getting too complicated, the idea of that is if you want your hair cut, you go to a hairdresser's. So if you want to meet some people, and I won't call it social integration, I don't think I'd go there. Herb might. The other thing that I want to share with you is really, just before I finish, is that I don't know about the other families here and the other people who need support, but you really can't get the staff, can you? People come and they move on, and then they come again and they move on. We've had 8 social workers in the last 10 years, and it's only struck me recently that I think we're actually being used to train them. I think we've become a branch of social services that we didn't know. One of the assessment forms I brought with me is a blank form. It's Lancashire's social assessment, 6 pages of little boxes that bear no relevance to anybody's life whatsoever. I actually wrestled with a young male social worker to get this form off him. It's a hard job, but somebody had to do it. After 2 visits, he moved to Clwyd. This is, I promise this is true. So, for some reason, social services don't like me. When support workers have come along, and we get on okay, eventually, usually, they tell me that they've been told that they're coming to work with the Elwells. And they're a very difficult family. Because you're very difficult family. And Mrs. Elwell's a dragon. And I'm really proud of this, because it takes years to build up sort of reputation. Now, I mean, of the 8 social workers, I've got to say that a couple of them were good. Well, one was good. The other one was a bit beige. You know, it was a bit like training a buff envelope. You couldn't really get anywhere, but she didn't do any harm. And then there's another one, George. That's his real name. He wanted to be in mental health. And he told me that every time he visited. But he'd been restructured and he sent to us. And you just couldn't, you know the type, like an aging hippie. He sort of knitted his own sandals and drove a CB6. But what I've learned over the years is if you're really careful and you set the ground rules from the beginning, they're not much trouble if you just keep quiet and don't ring them and they stay out of the way. It's only the ones who want to tell you the problems. Because you get tired, don't you, really, taking your own out. The other thing that's extremely difficult is equipment. I mean, no, incontinence pads, no problem. Toilet rails, I think 2 years is a bit long, really, to wait, but that's what we did. And the only good thing I can say about it is it was a good way of spending quality time together. You know, when somebody needs somebody to stand in front of them while they sit on the loo, it is sort of, you spend quality time. So we had some good conversations. Can you, God knows where I am now. Oh. Everybody should have a picture of the ambulance. These are not in order. This is Nicola with a friend, and can you flash through? Because I think I just wanted to say that in ordinary places it just works, and there are just a few. That's Lorna there went through. Nicola has all sorts of experiences with lots of different people. The young lady in the red buggy is Tia, a friend of mine, and she's in a school queue, and her mother cried because it was just because she was in a school queue, going into school, and it was just an ordinary experience. And her mother comes from Iran and speaks English, but she lapses into Farsi when she gets excited. And she rang me up and lapsed into Farsi, and having hearing impairment doesn't help. But when I calmed her down, I was really worried because I thought something awful had happened, and she actually told me 2 girls had just come and called for Tia to play out, and it was the first time that had happened. And this is the joy of inclusion. I'll pay you later, Rich, you did a wonderful job. Right. This is a wheelchair. For those who didn't recognise it. The reason I've taken a picture of this, and this is just to sort of wind up, is because we have trouble with wheelchairs at our house. We've eventually got there, and that's thanks to Lorna particularly and Nicola's circle of support. But what happened was, Nicola had a wheelchair just like that, only all black, and it's the standard. Well, we know now it's called an occasional wheelchair. Quote, the sort you push your granny in the front, down the front in. And the black one didn't work for Nicola, it was really uncomfortable. So I rang up and very carefully said, I think it's time that Nicola had an assessment. Yeah, there was no other way around it, and I carefully explained that this was the place where they make wheelchairs. And they said, what for? So I suggested a hang glider might be useful. Could we have a wheelchair? So they told me about the waiting list and all the rest of it, but they would do their best, and they did do their best. They did the assessment over the telephone. And I spoke to this very, very nice man, who had never met Nicola, but he seemed to know all about her. And he said that he sent this wheelchair, and this wheelchair arrived 3 weeks later. And it's exactly like the one that didn't work, but... Thank you. You spotted that. Now, but that caused a problem, because you can see, I don't know if you can see or not, there isn't a headrest on, and Nicola needs a headrest. We tried a chopping board, it wasn't too comfortable. And we tried a pillow, but that didn't work. So I rang up and said that this wasn't working too well. And eventually, to cut a long story short, after a few phone calls, and I was paid. I didn't get angry, only a bit. They sent a lady round to see me, and she's a community nurse, and we've got a lovely working relationship, and we're friends. So she was able to tell me the truth, and the truth was that she'd been sent round, not to assess the situation, but because I'd been reported for getting neurotic again. That's something that parents do a lot of. It didn't happen before, but I tend to, it comes over me every now and again. So, but the other bit that she'd been sent round for, now these are people who've never met Nicola, they've been sent round because, this is the truth, they had assessed, you might have to throw some light on this, Herb, being a psychologist, they'd assessed that Nicola had her pain was psychosomatic because she had a psychological aversion to the colour red. And the nurse told me that. Now, her dad's a Manchester United supporter, and we're socialists, so there's lots of red around the house. it's a crazy world, and I didn't want to stand up here and say that's really awful, and it gets you down, because that doesn't get us anywhere. But everything I've said to you is absolutely true. That's why I've taken the pictures. And anybody who wants some continence pad is very welcome, because it's raining. Where we've got to through all this maze of craziness, hopefully, is Nicola now has a circle of support, and that group of people are helping us to think a bit more clearly and help us to have the energy to continue with what feels like a battle. We've dreamed with Nicola and had lots of dreams. Last year at the conference we spent some time with people dreaming, and I would like to ask Judith if she would share with you what she came up with as her dream on Nicola's behalf, because I think it's absolutely wonderful and spot on. So thank you.
Where's Nicola? Nicola, are you there? Is she there? Wow. Where's Nicola? Wave your hand. There she is back there. Just very, very quickly, I had the privilege of being with Nicola's support circle about a year ago. And it was a wonderful experience, and there's a lot I don't remember about it, but what I do very distinctly remember is the very powerful experience that I've had on many occasions. Thank you. That's great, thanks. The very powerful experience I've had on several occasions of being with Nicola and realizing that she was helping me to dream. And Nicola actually, she and I gave a little chat at the previous Bolton conference together. Nicola has a wonderful ability to make people feel comfortable and to help them to just get in touch with who they are and what their dreams are. And she really revealed to us last year that her dream is to have her own place where she can welcome other people to come to her. Not to have to go traipsing around the world. That's my dream. That's my truck driver dream. To go traipsing around, but to have a place, a wonderful hospitality place of welcome where people can come and dream. And in that way to be a real partner with those of us who are changing the world. And Nicola's dream can be a wonderful contribution to all of us. It's not just her mom. It's Nicola too. And I look forward to her circle having that dream come true. Thank you.
I'd like to think with you for a few minutes about what some of the alternatives might be to these tracks. And I liked Micheline's speech last night so much that I'm going to give it again in a little bit different version. One of my great privileges is to work with groups of people with varying difficulties in different parts of the world, and I get the privilege of these groups inviting me sometimes to help them think about things. One of the groups that I've had the opportunity to make a relationship with is People First in the Australian Capital Territory. And the convener of People First in the Australian Capital Territory has a wonderful name. His name is Andrew Power. And the last time that I was there, we were trying to think about what People First thought of some plans that the government of the Australian Capital Territory were making. And they were making plans, despite their policy about inclusion and integration and all that stuff, they were making plans to build some more day centers and some more group homes. And we were looking at the physical plans for this building because they were trying to consult with people first, and they sent the plans over for people to look at. And the group looked, and we talked about it for about an hour. And then Andrew said, things have changed. Now they are looking at a map that has gotten all stretched and crooked. When you drive with a crooked map, you get lost. The faster you drive on a crooked map, the faster you get lost. The more money they put into doing this. But Andrew's understanding, I think, is really good of what the trouble is. The trouble is that people are looking at a crooked map. And part of the question is, as Herb pointed out, who are we to each other when we're in a time when the maps have gotten crooked? I think I decided to share this with you based on Michelin's speech and a conversation that I had last night. This is an important picture to me because it has a number of my friends in it. And I'd like to just take about 10 minutes to tell you a little bit of the story of this picture. This is a picture of a group of people who have decided that the way in which the government in our state funds services for people isn't fair. And they've decided that the way to help the people who operate the system that doesn't seem fair is to go and disrupt the course of daily business at the offices where people do this. And these people are having a good time, as you can see in the slide, on their way to there. And this is Ray in the white pants. And one of the things that's important about this picture is that the guy who's pushing his wheelchair is named Larry. And Larry is the chairperson of the mental health survivors group. That's what they call themselves. And he and Ray have gotten to know each other over the last year or so. But Ray was not always an activist. And Ray's been very interested in getting his story together. And he really, it's important, it seems important to him for people to know what his story is. And so he's enlisted me and 2 or 3 other people to see if people can learn something from it. That's his mission. Now, this particular story, which Ray has constructed with for us, begins with this woman whose name is Miranda. Miranda breathes with a respirator after a car accident. And Miranda lived for 4.5 years in a hospital, just a regular general hospital, in a hospital bed, because nobody thought it would be worthwhile to have a portable ventilator for her. So she was basically hooked to her hospital bed. And Miranda is physically extremely healthy. And Miranda's dream was to have her do not resuscitate order implemented. That was her dream. She signed a do not resuscitate order, and what she was doing was laying around waiting to die. And there's lots and lots of people who are not activists yet because they can't be, because they're stuck somewhere. Now, one reason that Miranda is not stuck anymore is because some people decided that it didn't make sense the way our government was spending its money. And its policies were crazy. And it seemed reasonable to go and meet some of the people who were most likely to be left out. We already know about the people that are in the big institutions. But we discovered that there were a whole bunch of people in Miranda's situation, almost 20 of them, that we could find out about pretty easily. And the issue wasn't money, because people were spending the equivalent of about 800 pounds a day on Miranda's care. So the issue for her wasn't money, it was possibility. And when Miranda first met people who came to see what she might prefer to do, she didn't trust them. Because they were white, a couple of us. Because a couple of us weren't disabled. Because the two disabled people didn't have the same disability as her. Because she thought it would make more sense to die. And it took the better part of 6 months of visiting Miranda every once in a while and saying, "Oh, what's happening? Is there anything you'd like?" For Miranda to say, "I want to get out of here. I want to get out of here." So this is Miranda's last birthday in the hospital. This is 3 years ago. And the shirt that she got says, "I'm out of here." Because the next day she was. Now, if it weren't for Miranda, there would be no picture of Ray and Larry. Because one of the people that was involved with Miranda is Connie. She's the person in the middle. And because Connie was interested in trying to help this funding change happen, she met some other people with disabilities who were stuck in other kinds of nursing homes. And one of the people that she met is the guy on the right in the suit, whose name is Fred. And Fred was pretty interested in getting out of the institution he was in, the nursing home he was in. And Fred is a very sobering person because Fred was fully included all the way through school. He had a bunch of school friends. He was an honor student. He graduated 8th in his class of 300 and had loads and loads of friends. Lots of people. Fred's a very personable guy. And 6 months after graduation, he went to the nursing home. Because all the friends from high school went off to do whatever you do after you get done with being in high school. And nobody thought to try to organize any kind of support for Fred. And so when his mom got to the place where she couldn't lift him because she hurt her back, Fred went to the nursing home. And there he stayed for 12 years. So Fred was involved in trying to figure out how to make some of this stuff happen. Fred's really good with a computer. So when we needed somebody to analyze the numbers from this study that sort of showed we're spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on nothing for people, Fred was a good person to do that. And Fred was talking about, maybe I could get out of the nursing home, but no, that's not realistic. That couldn't happen. And so Connie took Fred to meet Miranda. And Fred said, "Oh, well, if Miranda, who can't breathe without the aid of a machine and needs somebody around her all the time, can make it, I guess I could too." And they started to plan about how Fred might move out of the nursing home. Ray lives in the same nursing home. There's Ray again over there on the left. Fred was having a meeting in the day room. This is before the people at the nursing home got wise and ran us out of the day room. We're not allowed to have meetings in the day room anymore because it's intrusive on people's privacy. The other residents, could be disturbed by people organizing the overthrow of the nursing home. In the day room. So we're not allowed to do that anymore, but in those days we were allowed to do that. And there were a group of us sitting around trying to figure out how to help Fred, get out of there. And Ray came in to use the phone. Fred says to Ray, "Ray, we're breaking out of this place. You want to come?" He said, "No." He said, "What's this about?" "Well, it's a group of people that's trying to help me get what I want." He went and made his phone call, came back. He said, "I need a new TV. You want to get me a new TV?" "Nah, we don't do TVs." That was interesting to me because there's a lot of people who say you only do what the person says they want. And nobody grabbed hold of Ray by the scruff of the neck and said, "Ray, you will move out and be included in the community." But on the other hand, nobody stopped with that. Fred said to Ray, "Well, Ray, would you help me get out?" Ray said, "Sure. I'll help you. I don't want to move. Because my mom and dad would be real upset if I moved. They worked real hard to put me here. And they feel comfortable about my being here. and I don't feel comfortable making them uncomfortable, which is important to them. But, whoops, sorry. But Ray was really happy to help Fred get out. So that's a crowd of people involved in helping Fred move into his new place, a couple people with disabilities, a couple people who aren't disabled, a couple black people, a couple white people, a couple kids, a couple older people. About a year and a half's work. Had to write a new law. Figure out a way to get the new law passed. Had to write a new funding policy, which the bureaucracy wasn't very good at writing, so it had to be written for them. That's all it took. It's easy for me to talk about. I didn't do very much. I didn't do hardly anything. I take some pictures every once in a while and move a lot of boxes with Fred. My main contribution was physical. But this bunch of people and some other people worked pretty hard. And Fred moved. Now, after about 3 months of being part of Fred's circle, Ray said, I want to move too. He said, but we got to have a meeting with my mama and my father, who are divorced. And Connie called his mother Elwell. And I got a phone call from the Secretary of State's office in our state. And from the Better Business Bureau, because Ray's mother had called all these different people to try to figure out who the hell is this woman? What is this? A bunch of people that want things to be different. Ray made some rules for his circle meetings. He said to his mother and to his father, I need you both. You don't get along with each other. You've been divorced for a long time. Every time you're in the same place, you get violent with each other. I can't pick between you. You both have to be here, and you are here to talk about me, not about each other. And if you fight with each other, you have to leave. This is not bad for somebody who's been assessed as moderately mentally retarded. Although the people in the nursing home are kind of worried about that. They have the notion that Ray is kind of a puppet in all of this. Well, the point anyway is, if we're going to have community, we've got to not only respect where people are at the moment, we've got to also think about what kind of relationships people need. And we've got to recognize the possibilities of people making things happen together. Pat and Andrea are two people who are the people that actually wrote the law and actually wrote the proposal to change the funding source. They didn't know how to do that before they started to do this. They learned how. There is no way that I can think of out of the trap that Lynn so wonderfully sketched for us, unless people get together and figure out how it needs to be different and then make it that way. Miranda wouldn't be out if Pat hadn't taught herself how the funding works. And if Andrea hadn't learned about political influence and where that came from. And the fact that political influence is partly about demonstrations like this, but a lot of it isn't like that at all. A lot of that is like this. This is Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin says, I've noticed that comic book superheroes usually fight evil maniacs with grandiose plans to destroy the world. Why don't superheroes go after more subtle, realistic bad guys? Hobbes says, yeah, the superhero could attend council meetings and write letters to the editor and stuff like that. The editor says, I think I see the problem. Hobbes says, quick, to the bat facts.
Got the letter to the editor about putting kids in special school.
Yeah, yeah. That's part of what it's about.
About putting kids in for the hospital.
Yeah.
And newspaper.
Because
Barely know about it, don't you? First time I met you.
we still do that, right? We still put kids in hospitals. And we still put kids in separate schools. And just one letter to the editor isn't going to make it better. But if we don't write that one letter to the editor, we miss a possibility. If we don't have the meeting with all the people who do the writing, they won't have the possibility. So Pat has taught herself a lot of things that she didn't know she'd ever need to know. And Andrea taught herself a lot of things that she never thought she'd need to do. This is Mark. Mark is one of the organizers of a group called ADAPT. Ray is a very conservative person politically and personally. Ray is an active member of the Baptist Church. Ray is represented by Mr. Gingrich. I guess his reputation may have reached even to here. And is an active supporter of Mr. Gingrich's. And so Ray's politics are not, there's not a lot of red around Ray's room. Ray thinks that there's a whole lot of people that cheat on welfare, and one of Ray's main goals is to get off welfare. He and I have interesting arguments. Mark has been a real model for Ray. Because Mark has said, you got to act up sometimes to make things change. And so Ray, over the last couple of years, has been more and more and more involved in direct action. He doesn't do that for himself. He does that for disabled people. He's not in the demonstration because of him, although he is there because of him. He's there because of people with disabilities. And particularly, Ray is there because of kids with disabilities. This is a little girl who's holding a sign whose her mom has made that. It says, Leah is the only label I require. Right? So Ray doesn't just turn out for actions about him. He's interested in supporting Leah's mom about inclusive schooling. And he's one of the people who met with this set of families and said, you got to get more active. You can't just take all this crap. You got to at least go show them that you don't think it's a good idea. They won't get the message if you just write them letters. So we don't do stuff like that. We're polite people around here. Ray said, can't always be polite. Can't always be polite. Ray likes to be polite. I'm not sure. So Ray's dream has been deferred for 3 years. The conversation I had last night suggests that maybe we're a little closer. Maybe within a month or two of Ray moving. But for 3 years, he stayed in a nursing home. And I asked him, when we were getting this together, because Ray knows that I travel a lot, that's why I miss so many of the circle meetings. Part of my penalty, I'm supposed to tell people about it. I don't like telling people about it at all, but that's actually part of the deal. Well, if you're going away, please tell them about me. In fact, he says, did you tell them? These are things that Ray says have helped him to speak and to work on his dream for almost 3 years. If we just listened to Ray, remember, it would be I need a new TV. That was the disabled person's choice. And so when the social workers quit through to do the reassessment of the people in the nursing homes, they said, want to move Ray? And he said no. And then they get to give sort of high-flown moral talks about how we don't intrude on the choices of disabled people to stay in institutions. These are the things Ray says. Having people listen to me and not laugh at me and not put me down and not be scared of what I say. Ray says, people are scared if you want a big change. So you learn not to say that you want a big change. Because it freaks people out. They don't know what to do. Now, all these things I think are things about building community, whatever that is, I think. And all these things I think are very simple gifts. They're within the gift of all of us here. To listen to somebody with some kind of care, to not laugh at them. Notice Ray didn't say, people listen to me and then make my wishes come true. He just said, people listen to what I want and don't laugh at me or put me down or act afraid. Secondly, he says, it's helped me a lot to go to conferences and find out what other people have done. It helped me to visit Miranda. Ray can't use his hands because of his cerebral palsy. And so he didn't think you could work if you couldn't use your hands. Because he says, I'm not smart enough to use a computer. So I've been trying all my life to get numbers. I can't do that. So I don't know what I do for work. So it's important for him to meet people who can organize and support employment for people with significant cerebral palsy. So he could, and once Ray can see that somebody else can do it, he says, well, it won't work like that for me, but it can be done. So now he's got a job on his list. Going to meetings to testify matters a lot. Ray's a very conservative person, and direct action has only come to him after a couple of years. But the first thing that made sense to him after about 2 months was, Ray, there's going to be a meeting, and people want to hear what people think about how things should change for people with disability. Well, he wanted to do that, but he didn't know what to say. Well, that's not a problem. All we have to do is kind of think with him about what do you think is important to say. And his first statement was about 60 words long. Now he's got a 6-page handout. All of it was produced one sentence at a time. Ray will say something, and then he'll say, that's good, write it down. Now, if there's nobody to write it down, he can't recover it. He does great at stringing it together. No, I don't like it like that. If somebody else puts it together for him, he'll tell you how to rearrange the paragraphs, how to rearrange the sentences. Helping Fred make it out. One of the oddest things we do, I think, is sometimes limit circle membership just to people with disabilities, like it was only the disabled people that the circles were for. Instead of recognizing that philosophy, the most powerful way to figure something out is to help make something happen with somebody else. Learning to read. Ray wants me to be very clear about the fact that the nursing home has nothing to do with his learning to read. That was about finding a tutor. And it happens at the library, it doesn't happen at the nursing home. He does not want the tutor in the nursing home, because then he says the nursing home will use it to advertise how good their programs are. And he does not want that to happen. Another thing that's helped Ray to make it for 3 years is fighting the nursing home. He says he can't really fix it, but sometimes he tries. Which I understand. He says every time I try to fix it, it gets worse. He says every time I win a complaint, they screw me harder in a different way. He says I think the trouble is with the place. But I can be out of it as much as possible. Get more active with the Disability Rights Center. Has made a lot of difference to him. Being part of demonstrations. Keeping my book. Ray's book is where he keeps track of what he thinks about things. And because Ray doesn't write, he asks the person sitting next to him, write in my book. And if he's at a meeting and somebody says something that makes sense to him, he says, write that down. Write it in my book. And then people read it back to him. And sometimes he says, wasn't as good as I thought, cross it out. And sometimes he says, that's good, put a star next to it. Asking and having lots of people help me. Ray's put together a card that he gives people that says, I want to get out of the nursing home, and to do that, the independent care waiver fund needs to be increased because there's no more money in it. Write to the governor and tell him Ray Browning wants to get out of the nursing home. You could also help me by taking me to meetings, by taking notes for me. Ray's got 16 things that people can do for him, and they're all on a card. And when he meets somebody, he gives them one of his cards. And a bunch of people have said, well, I can help with that. And he's put it in my book. And then he's got more people to call. This is not rocket science, right? None of this is complicated. Toni Morrison, at the end of her haunting book, Lovett, has one of the male characters, one of the men in the book, describe the protagonist of the book. And he describes her this way. He says, she is a friend of my mind. She gathers me, the pieces I am. She gather them and give them back to me in all the right order. It's good, you know, when you find somebody who's a friend of your mind. I think we need to be friends of each other's minds, because we are all of us in pieces as far as I can work out. And whatever the enterprise of community is about, it's about very fallible people in a very badly broken world trying to figure out what the next thing is. And as we try to do that, we need a theory of change. And I would like to offer you one part of a theory of change in the form of a little story. And I've got a short poem, I hope, so this is going to take about 6 minutes. This is a story by Kevin Henkes, and it's called Owen. Owen. And it is, I think, an important part of the process of change. It's not more important than direct action. It's not more important than circles of support, but it's another part of the theory of change. Owen had a fuzzy yellow blanket. He'd had it since he was a baby. He loved it with all his heart. We all have our attachments. He loved it with all his heart. Fuzzy goes where I go, said Owen. And Fuzzy did, upstairs, downstairs, in between, inside, outside, upside down. Fuzzy likes what I like, said Owen. And Fuzzy did. Orange juice, grape juice, chocolate milk, ice cream, peanut butter, applesauce cake. Isn't he getting a little old to be carrying that thing around, asked Mrs. Tweezers. Now, in lots of places, guys like me end up being the Mrs. Tweezers, you know, it's time to make a change here. And she's an important part of the process of change. But let's see how. Isn't he getting a little old to be carrying that thing around to Mrs. Tweezers? Haven't you heard of the blanket fairy? Owen's parents hadn't. Mrs. Tweezers filled them in. Helpful consultant. That night, Owen's parents told Owen to put Fuzzy under the blanket, under his pillow. In the morning, Fuzzy would be gone, but the blanket fairy would leave an absolutely wonderful, positively perfect, especially terrific big boy gift in place of Fuzzy. Owen stuffed Fuzzy inside his pajama pants and went to sleep. No blanket fairy, said Owen in the morning. No kidding, said Owen's mother. No wonder, said Owen's father. Fuzzy's dirty, said Owen's mother. Fuzzy's torn and ratty, said Owen's father. No, said Owen, Fuzzy is perfect. And Fuzzy was. Fuzzy played Captain Plunger with Owen in the toilet. Fuzzy helped Owen become invisible. Fuzzy was absolutely essential when it came to nail clippings and haircuts and trips to the dentist. Can't be a baby forever, said Mrs. Tweezers. Haven't you heard of the vinegar trick? Owen's parents hadn't. Mrs. Tweezers filled them in. When Owen wasn't looking, Owen's father dipped his favorite corner of Fuzzy into a jar of vinegar. Owen sniffed it and smelled it. He picked a new favorite corner. Then he rubbed the smelly corner around his sandbox, buried it in the garden, and dug it up again. Good as new, said Owen. Some of the things that we're attached to don't actually change in the most straightforward possible way. Fuzzy wasn't very fuzzy anymore, but Owen didn't mind. He carried it, he wore it, he dragged it, he sucked it, he hugged it, he twisted it. What are we going to do? Asked Owen's mother. School is starting soon, said Owen's father. Can't bring a blanket to school, said Mrs. Tweezers. Haven't you ever heard of saying no? Owen's parents hadn't. Mrs. Tweezers filled them in. I have to bring Fuzzy to school, said Owen. No, said Owen's mother. No, said Owen's father. Owen buried his face in Fuzzy. He started to cry and would not stop. Don't worry, said Owen's mother. He'll be all right, said Owen's father. And then suddenly, before you remember the moment at which this happened, suddenly, Owen's mother said, I have an idea. It was an absolutely wonderful, positively perfect, especially terrific idea. First she snipped, then she sewed, then she snipped and sewed some more. Snip, 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 sew, sew, sew. Dry your eyes, wipe your nose. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Now Owen carries one of his not-so-fuzzy handkerchiefs wherever he goes. And Mrs. Tweezers doesn't say a thing. One of the things that we owe each other are all the gifts in that story. The gift of Mrs. Tweezers to say, hey, how about moving on here? But although her message is important, her methods don't work so good. It also requires a situation to come to some kind of crisis inside of Owen and his family, and for them to stop and say, what can we do now? And then, maybe, an idea like this comes up. I don't know that we'll be able to reinvent government with that story. But maybe we could build some community with it. If we would be respectful of each other's fuzzy yellow blankets. And try to figure out what to do about that. Two sets of last words. Edwin Rich wrote a wonderful poem called Dreams Before Waking. And in it she talks about the death of her neighborhood, the destruction of her neighborhood. Not by something abstract, but by something literally concrete. The creation of a highway right down through the middle of it. And she reflects on this for a couple of pages, and then she comes to the end. She said, what would it mean to live in a city whose people were changing each other's despair into hope? You yourself must change it. What would it feel like to know your country was changing? You yourself must change it. Though your life felt arduous, new, and unmapped, and strange, what would it mean to stand on the first page of the end of despair? Though your life felt arduous, and new, and unmapped, and strange, what would it mean to stand on the first page of the end of despair? Another one of my favorite artists says it another way in conclusion. Jerry Garcia says, somebody has to do something, and it's just incredibly pathetic. It has to be.
Okay, just before we go off, I'd like to thank very much the tonight, Lynn and John, and to invite those people that are not here in the conference full time, if they would like to come tomorrow as well. Tomorrow morning is going to be the closing session, and it's 11 o'clock, I think we can. Is it 11 o'clock? Yes, around 11 o'clock, but you're more than welcome to come for the morning. And for any of those people that are in the audience that would perhaps like to do something, having heard the contributions this evening, it came to me, having heard the three people, the idea of writing letters. Writing letters particularly to directors of education, and particularly to the director of social services. And it struck me as a really powerful message that how or on what we could write those letters. Was a mountain of incontinence pads, which I'm sure Lynn would share you, and I'm sure they'd go neatly into an envelope. So feel free to take ownership of one of those continence pads and write your letter. And I look forward to seeing you in the morning. People will be around at the bar and having a drink. I hope you're able to stay and share with people some of the experiences that they've had while they've been here. Thank you very much.
You know, what do you want to hear best? Do you want to hear the good news or the bad news first? Bad news. The bad news, okay. The bad news is, folks, that after 5 years this is going to be the last one. And the good news is that it will continue on in some other form. Whatever that form is, I'm not sure. I know there's some chatting going amongst people from Integration Alliance and so on. But each year, people have come for different reasons. And I think that mostly those that keep on coming are those that want to get it right, I suppose, but also those that want to plug into some sort of energy, some sort of battery. Because when you go away from here, you know, the world out there doesn't share the same ideals necessarily that we've had in the last 4 days. And you go out and hop, skipping and jumping and saying, guess what I've discovered? And do you know what? People don't want to know. And the energy gets sapped and sapped and sapped. I want to know, I'll come back to that a bit later, but I want to know, what have people actually got from the last 4 days? What is it that you're going away with? Support. Okay. Is there anybody that can do some of the graphics? Is there somebody in Jack and Marshall's group? Oh, well done, Sam. Support. What else? Tools.
Friends.
Friends. Thank you very much. Support, tools, friends, ideas. What else? Knowledge. Thank you very much. And networks. A couple more from over this side. Dreams. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is this the last one?
Yeah, this is going to be the last one.
There's no more.
There's no more after this, but it's going to be in a different form. It won't be 5 days here anymore, but it'll be something somewhere.
All right.
Okay?
A greater understanding.
A greater understanding.
Okay. Hang over.
A leg over? No. Would you like to come and draw that? Oh, I thought you said a leg over. What else?
Beliefs that it's happening everywhere, in other places around the country.
Beliefs that it's happening everywhere. That there's other places around the country. You're not on your own. What else? Does that cover it?
Release.
Sorry? Release. Release.
Inspiring.
Sorry? Inspiring. What is it that people feel that's going to happen now that they've been here for that 4 days? What are you going to do as you go away? What are some of the things that you might consider doing there? Sleep. Think. Challenge. Look for the stars. Change. Do you mean change yourself, change other people? Change everything. Okay. And that will be what, tomorrow morning or?
Find more allies.
Say that again?
Find more allies.
Find more allies. Join more allies. Convert more allies. Demonstrate.
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. How do you keep going? What are some of the things that sap your energy to keep going on this thing? You know, sort of getting to the year 2000, and you know, when you look around the world, we seem to be in quite a state still, and it's not as though it's getting that much better. We look at stuff like crime, you know, and it's rising. We can't actually catch people committing crime as quick as they're actually doing it. We find that when we do get hold of people that are perpetrators of various crimes against society, we don't know what the hell to do with them anyway. You know, we put them in prison or we give them probation. And when they come out, 80% of those reoffend. And it's happening with pollution too. Ecologists can't figure out how we can save the planet quick enough before we mess it up for the next generation. It's the same with medical people who haven't yet figured out how to cure the common cold, let alone cure AIDS. It's the same with economists who tell us just around the corner we're going to come out of the recession. It's all going to be fine. And that corner's been turning now for the last 10, 15 years and we're still not out of it. The biggest growth we've got is unemployment. And it goes on with all these areas, and yet we get into the next millennium. It's as though we're very clever at what we do, but we don't understand how it is we can do it better. We leave school with great academic qualifications, and it means that we can split the atom. It means that we can swap hearts and vital organs quite easily from one person to another to save lives. It means that we can fax each other, press a button at a moment's notice and go from one part of the world to another part of the world almost instantly. We know how to do this stuff. We have a lot of technology. What we don't seem to have is that underlying philosophy of how to use it. And so we get caught up in stuff where we find half our world is dying of starvation and the other half is on the F-plan diet. And it's got that weird sort of logic that we go through the whole time. And for me, the idealism of inclusion begins to address some of those issues to make some sense of the craziness that's going on around us. And for me, we have to start with the children. And we have to start in the education system, not concentrating on the academics the whole time, but concentrating on some of the ways of how can we learn so that our youth grow up in future caring for one another, caring for the planet, finding out how we can help one another to make the world a better place. Because sure in hell we haven't done as well as we could have in the past. The future has to be better. There are two things. I'm sad that this is finishing. Things tend to sort of be of their time, I suppose, and they have that sort of natural way of growing into something else. It's more like a metamorphosis, I hope this is going to be with this, the gathering that comes here. But for me it's sad, and there are two things that have been outstanding over the 5 years that we've not really mentioned that openly, but it's been implicit in all that we do. And the two things are love and laughter. It's been there throughout the whole 5 years, each time that's happened. And what I've learned over that 5 years is that we stop worrying about how we can help somebody else live a fuller life, because it's arrogant to do that until you know how to live a fuller life yourself. It isn't a matter of inclusion being something else that you write down in a book or read about. It's how you live your life, how you walk the talk. And it's how it saves you in your life. It's how it makes you somebody as a better person, so that it enables the people around you to be better, and it enables the community, the world, whatever, to be a better place. And inclusion has incorporated those two things for me, love and laughter. And I learnt a lot about love from Sheila. Most of you know, I feel comfortable doing this here, as comfortable as I can be, because I'm on home turf. Sheila, my wife, died a year ago. She was killed in a horse riding accident suddenly. And the 15 years that we'd spent together meant that we'd learned from one another how it was to support one another, to do the things that each of us needed to do. You know, so many people say to their partners in life, I love you, I really love you, but if your hair was a bit longer instead of shorter, or if you could lose a little bit of weight, you know, how can people love people when they want to change them? And love is about telling one another. And I'm so pleased that we told one another in a regular way. Because if we hadn't, how would I be feeling now? I wish that I had done. And we did all the things that we had done, wanted to do, simply because we used some of the tools that we were talking about here. The path had been a regular tool in the last couple of years. You know, we sat down and said, where is it we want to be next year? What is it that we want to be doing? And it enabled us to live 4 or 5 lifetimes in that one short lifetime that Sheila had. So I feel happy and comfortable about that. I miss her, and I feel uncomfortable about that. But it's a love that we share for one another in telling each other, we want to celebrate what you can achieve. And I wanted to help Sheila be the person that she was and celebrate it when she got there, and she did the same for me. I'd like to spend just a minute or two in sharing it with you. Could you turn the... could you press that button? Okay.
That
I always wanted to know what the meaning of life was, and Sheila never wanted to know. She just was interested in getting on and living it. I understand now that the meaning of life is about how we learn to love one another better, and it's like actually passing on a candle of light, and each of us carries that candle of light, and we have to pass it from one another to make that light grow until it becomes a blinding light and it grows around the universe. And that's our responsibility, to carry that part of the light of the candle. The thing that I love most about Sheila was a sense of humour. And I know that these two things are going to be important in my life. It must be important in everybody's life. And yet when we talk about people that we're supporting, we never see about love and sense of humour in the little ticky boxes anywhere. You know, they don't exist. But humour is a way in which we can cut out, you know, some of the tension that's there in life. Some of the tension that's around us, the anxieties that we have, is minimised by humour. And I think as time goes on, we have to learn more about what humour's about. If we don't have it naturally, if we don't find it there, and people frighten the hell out of me that don't laugh. You know, people that have got some way of not getting in touch with their funniness, the sense of fun in their life, really bother me an awful lot. I want to know how many times you think, when we start to do the research, when you look into research on humour, how many times do you think a 4-year-old child laughs each day? How many?
Hundreds.
How many?
Hundreds.
How many? Give me a specific number.
589.
589, no? Actually,
We're being more specific.
actually, it's 300 times a day, miserable little kids. So,
You're not telling them the right joke.
how many times, the way I tell them probably, how many times a day do adults laugh? It's 7. 7. What happens between the age of 4 that makes us grow up, that makes us so bloody miserable? Well, tell us some of the things that happen.
Become adults.
Become adults. What else happens? Responsibilities. What else?
Too much time assessing.
Too much time assessing.
Our bonds get tight.
Our bonds get tight.
Mortgages increase.
Why do we get this miserable?
Told to grow up.
We should be laughing 300 times a day. That's chronic. And it's important that we have a sense of humour, because laughter, according to the research once more, laughter it's healthy, folks. It's actually better for you to laugh than not to laugh. It makes you psychologically more healthy, and it makes you physically more healthy to laugh. And it's a good laxative. Who's not peed himself laughing? It's a good laxative. It's also Zen-like, because when you think of the essence of some of what's happening in experiencing and focusing on one thing at the exclusion of... People go out and sit under trees contemplating their navel for 4 or 5 days. You know, it's a Zen thing. When you're laughing, you cannot concentrate on anything else but what you're laughing at. So it's Zen-like. It gives a good attitude. You know, the more I've heard around here is about, you know, we've got to change attitudes. So let's use some of the extra tools. We've got tools of path, we've got tools of circles, we've got music as a tool, and we've got laughter as a tool if we really want to use that. And we can use it in all sorts of ways. Laughing bad. Not laughing dead, madam. Is there something you want to share with us?
That's a good idea too.
Laughing, yeah. Laughing. Go and have a good look at yourself in the mirror, you know, when you come out the bath. Have a good laugh. Laughing bad really means it diffuses situations that are really nasty. I can remember when I first started teaching, working with people that were labelled as having emotional problems, and it ended up in one situation, due to my inexperience and due to the other person's weight and height, they stepped forward, and the 16-year-old, up here somewhere with a 9 o'clock shadow, had a knife. And he was coming towards me saying, "I'll fucking kill you." And, you know, in situations like that, we call it when the adrenaline runs brown, I think. And there he was. And he started to take paces closer and closer, and the face was one of hatred. And the knife was nearer and nearer. And all I could say was, "Your flies are under." And he went, and as he looked up, he went, and it's the unexpected, and it's the way in which we can use humour as some sort of tool.
I hope you had your brain corduroys on.
If you can't laugh, if you really can't, there are some people that can't, their chuckle box is gone or something, but they don't laugh. If you can't laugh, you have to, I'll come back to what happens if you can't laugh. Let me go on to this first. I want to try it. Could you stand up, everybody? Those that can stand up, stand up. Those that can sit down, move to somewhere where you can see. Okay, now then, I need a little pencil here, so I'm going to use this one. It's a little exercise I want to try out with people. On here, we've got red, but the colour is blue. Blue, but the colour is black. Black, but the colour is red. So I'm going to start pointing to these things here, and I want you to shout out what the word says, not what the colour is. Okay? There we go.
Red, blue, black, blue, black, red, blue, red, black, blue, black, blue, red.
Good. Well done. Okay. Now then, sit down. You're going to need to. I want you now to read out the colour, but not the word. Are you ready for this? There we go.
Blue, black, red, red, blue, black.
Okay. All those little clever know-alls with degrees, stand up. PhDs, come on, John, everybody. PhDs, up, come on. Master's degrees, we'll take anything. Right, degree, good, there we go. We want the colour. We've got the colour, I think. Go. What was the point of that? No point at all, really. It's just to have fun, for Christ's sake. In life you have to have fun. And sometimes there's no point except simply to have fun. Now, if you can't laugh, fake it. Something else you want to share with us? Fake it. It's like when the Rottweiler comes and starts making love to your leg, fake the orgasm. So, I want you to turn to your partner, stand up, be with your partner, face your partner, and I want you to get your face as close as you can, but not touching, about that far apart with your noses. And start to fake the laughter. Fake it, come on, when you faked? What happened? You laugh anyway. So if you can't laugh, fake the laughter. And it's, you know, I get a feeling when you go around teacher training colleges and places, you have to teach people some of these human things. You know, we're not working with widgets, folks, we're dealing with humanity. And if you're working with somebody, then you need to take into account love and laughter. And if you can't laugh, fake it in some way, because you'll soon learn to as you go along the road. You'll teach yourself how to do that. And do things that are silly. Let's do something silly now. Shall we stand up again? Let's do something silly. Right. I want you to, I'm going to say, ooh, and then you say, yeah, ooh, okay? Yeah. Ooh, yeah, ooh. Yeah. Now listen to this one. Ooh, ah, yeah, ooh, ooh, ah. Ooh, ah, woggle. Ooh, ah, no, you missed the yeah out. Yeah. Ooh, ah, wiggle bum. Ooh, ah, wiggle bum. Missed the yeah out. I missed the yeah out. Ooh, ah, boo, Yeah. 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 Ooh, ah, wiggle bum. Why did that feel like absolutely stupid, didn't it? Sit yourselves down. But if you're prepared to do that, you're somebody who's prepared to get in touch with human services, it seems to me. Just before I hand over to Joe, because I can't take it, I'll get fed up after a while. I just want to leave you with three things. Work like you don't need the pay. Dance like you're not being watched, and love like you've never been hurt. Thank you very much.
Follow that. I've got about just 20 minutes slot because I always think it's important to let people know when you're going to finish and start. And within the 20 minutes or so, I'd just like to spend a few minutes, first of all, thanking a few people. Now, we've heard that the conference is not going to be in the same format as it is for the last 5 years. The conference has been an incredibly important gathering. And it started, really, I think, about 7 years ago. And it started 7 years ago when I and John Hall and Marcia and John O'Brien were sitting under a tree at 7:30 in the morning in Montreal. And I'd been to Marcia's workshop. And I thought, this is weird. The idea of this happening somewhere in England, in the UK, and the idea of bringing Marcia over and presenting her to a situation like this, I thought was a really bizarre idea. But having said that, a real good risk, because you didn't know what was going to happen. Because I'd been so used to going to conferences and sitting and receiving and taking notes. And as long as I had my hand out at the end of the conference, I felt safe. I felt justified in coming to it and going away. And Marcia doesn't give handouts. And I said to Marcia and John, would you like to come over to England and sort of do a conference of some sort? And she said yes. So I'd organised the budget before I went to it around Marcia and John. And she said, but there'll be 7 people coming with us. And I agreed. Yes, of course. You know, we're not thinking of pounds, shillings and pence and budgets and all that sort of horrible thing. And they came. And one of the things that I've learnt over the last 5 years is that there's been a tremendous reaction. Something has happened on each of those occasions. I don't know what, and a lot of people don't know what, because so many people take so many different things away. And something Michelin said the other night, that in terms of freedom, you can't give people freedom. but you can actually create a climate where people feel free. And with the team, who I've grown to love and to respect and love working with, that they've actually said on lots of occasions, we can't teach anybody anything. We can create environments in which people can learn. And we can create environments in which people can actually, for a short time, be crazy, be silly. Use the word love, because I've not been to many conferences where they talk about that word. And I have to admit, I am sometimes embarrassed about that. I find it sometimes uncomfortable. But for me, working with the team, and it's been incredibly comfortable, but incredibly painful and incredibly stressful in so many ways. But I know something's happening. And again, when people say, well, what about the last 5 years? And why has it come to an end? I don't believe it's come to an end. I think it has actually reached a phase whereby I am personally feeling very uncomfortable about the cost of coming here. And I'm personally feeling very uncomfortable about the idea of having a conference on inclusive education that I could not afford to attend. I could not afford to attend to come here.
What about Manchester?
Manchester also, I couldn't afford in terms of the cost. We do.
Manchester also?
Also, we will be doing something else,
Yeah.
and I think also it's important to say that over the few years, we've come to the conference, and I've come to love the conference as the gathering, and been a really important part of that, and Oz has certainly been one of them. And whatever happens, Oz, you'll be there next year, whatever you do.
You know, the conference has been going on 5 years. Where has it been?
It's been in Manchester.
Same as last year?
Same as last year. And this year it's in Bolton, and next year, who knows? But something will happen, and you'll know about it, Oz.
It's been at Manchester, at the same place as last year?
Yeah.
For 5 years?
For 4 years, and then 1 year before that was in Wigan.
Oh.
So something will happen. There are too many alliances and networks that are built up for that to disappear. It won't disappear. Something is going to happen.
Okay.
And I think, you know, I say to myself, well, what has been in it for me personally, and a tremendous strength. I've gained a tremendous strength and a tremendous sense of security. Not always comfort, but security. Because I remember when I started teaching 20 odd years ago, for the first 12, 15 years I spent working as a teacher in segregated provision, segregated special schools for kids with all sorts of labels. And it took me a long time to realise that the reason why I went into special education was to hide a lot of insecurities. And it was a way almost of hiding behind them, and it was reassuring because people said, well, you're in special, you're not a real teacher. And I took a lot of comfort in that, because I didn't have to show that I was. And one of the things I've learned about being at this conference, these gatherings, it's not about what I'm labelled, it's about who I am and how I feel and how I respond to people and how I want to be with people. And this idea of learning and who we learn from, one of the things that I've really come to understand is that we have just got to find different ways of being with each other. Because the ways in which we spend our time together in schools and in colleges and in universities and community centres is not working for a lot of people. It's not working for me. And if I can find different ways of hearing, different ways of seeing, different ways of being with other people. It reminds me of the time, because now I'm in teacher education and I spend a lot of time going around schools and colleges watching teachers perform and sitting there taking notes. And one or two people will have to forgive me, but I had a very interesting visit a few years ago, which you may have heard, but I think it's worth repeating because it was a very powerful learning experience for me. I went to a college where there was a group of 8 to 9 women in their 30s and their 40s who had been released from institutions, and they were doing independent living skills in a college of further education. And they were sat in a circle. There were about 8 or 9 people, men and women, adults, and they were doing 3-hour session, and I had to go in and observe the teacher doing a 3-hour session, and the 3-hour session was how to make a cheese sandwich. And the teacher was just a wonderful, wonderful person, incredibly wonderful person. And she had an excellent rapport outside the group. Inside the group was slightly different. But I was sat there observing this 3-hour session on how to make a cheese sandwich. This, by the way, was at 9:30 in the morning. And I was sat there, and if anyone's ever been in this situation where they're doing assessing, you have to give the impression that you know what you're doing. You may have no idea what you're assessing, but the important thing is that the tick goes in the right box and that your signature's there. And if you look confident enough in the assessment, it appears that you are assessing. So I was sitting there looking really confident, and there was these men and women sat round me. I sat in the circle. And so we had this acetate, this woman put an acetate on. And in the acetate it was about 8 boxes, and the first box was a ring, and then a triangle, and then a lump, which actually represented a cheese grater, a lump of cheese, and a tomato. The next one was a square, and a thing like that, which was a knife. And then the next, and it went on. The whole sequence went on till the end, and that was this thing with this in, and that was a cheese sandwich. There was no cheese in sight, by the way. It was a cheese sandwich. And so we had the first half hour where you would actually make the cheese sandwich. Where you would go, why you would have a cheese sandwich, and what time you would make it, and what you would do, and where you would do it. And there's me still assessing this. And so, I was sat next to this man, and I'll call him Peter. This man had been labelled or accused of being autistic. And I was sat next to him, and he was looking at me. You know, I was sort of being the official. And this went on, and he stared at me. And I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, because one thing that you do if somebody's assessing you, you start staring at them. The assessment changes. And he said, "Are you normal?" And you know, you're frightened of responding. I said, "I have been accused of it." And he says, "Do people stare at you? Do people stare at you when you go to the post office? Am I learning anything? How do I know when I'm learning?" I've been in teacher education for 8 years with people who've got more degrees than a thermometer. Nobody has ever asked me, how do I know when I'm learning? And get rid of that assessment. And they said, "I don't like cheese." But the number of occasions when I have been shoving cheese down people's throats. And I said to the teacher afterwards, and the teacher is a wonderful person, and I said to the teacher, "I've just been talking to," and it wasn't a conversation in the I've been talking, and she said, "He doesn't speak." He doesn't use speech. So I said, "Well, I heard that he doesn't like cheese sandwich. Oh, don't worry, he said, we're making ham next week. So, and this woman was a wonderful woman. It is not about finding the bad person. Because I recognised in that situation, Peter enabled me to recognise what silly things and bizarre things we do when we're in these situations. And we can do things that we would never have dreamt of doing in any other situation. So it's not about sort of finding out who they are. Because as somebody once said to me, I can't remember who it was, but you point one finger and three of them are pointing back at you. I think it was you, Heidi, that told me. I think it was you. So it's not about looking for the villains. It's about looking for the allies. And again, I know that wherever we're going, that we need to find our allies. I found powerful allies with Michelin, Richard, Christine, Martin, people that are prepared to actually hear what I'm saying and struggle together. Because nobody, I'm sure, feels as though they've got the right answer. We're struggling and we have to find ways of working with each other and being with each other. And if anything over these last 5 years, I have found different ways of being with people. And whatever people take away from it, because it's quite amazing, a gathering like this, and sort of being in a position where you're organising, you get lots of people coming to you with lots of different things. And I can usually tell now within the first 2 hours of what the main concerns of the place are going to be. And often those things may appear to be minor, but they're very significant for that individual. And again, we have to find ways of hearing what that individual is telling us. Because I know also, when I'm speaking to individuals, I know that however it might appear trivial to me, that people will recognise it and will hear it with me. The gardening metaphor, which is a lovely one, is that we have to tend the garden as if we're going to die tomorrow. But we have to plan it as if we're going to live forever. And I think that these gatherings are about how we do tend to our individual needs, and how do we do tend to the detail about what we're going to do on Monday morning, and how we relate to people. And we know that on Monday morning, no major change is going to take place. But what we can do in places like this, in spaces like this, is plan and actually create a vision for ourselves, which is something that will actually give us life. But more important and most important in order to get to that vision is to have friends, allies, and people in our lives. And although Sheila's no longer physically in our lives, she's with us. And it's important, I think, that we recognise the importance of life and people with us, and also how we create that and help other people create that around their own lives too. I've loved being here, I've loved being together. And there's a few people I'd just like to thank. Karen, would you? Karen. Karen's done an awful lot of running around again behind the scenes, because it's not just about one person, and one of the reasons why I think this has come to is that, you know, other people will take different responsibilities in the organisation. But Karen's been running around all over the show, getting wheels spare wheels fixed and photocopying here and photocopying there, and also has been to every one of the conferences, and you know, wouldn't have been able to do without her. There are lots of other people behind the scenes. I would also, the crash I think has been particularly good. I was hoping that the people from the crash would have been here, but the crash and I think the youngsters are very good judges of what's been going on down there, and they have certainly been coming to us with very positive messages. So to the crash, if you see people in the crash, thank you very much, and thanks for looking after the kids, or allowing the kids to look after them, because I think they've been doing a very good job as well. Just before we finally finish, Oz is going to sing.
Go ahead.
Because he's been...
Before which, I wouldn't be surprised if Joe got a standing ovation.
Thank you. Oz is going to have a sing. Oz?
See that?
I think definitely.
I don't know if it's a famous statement that you should always finish with a song, but it should be if you didn't anyway.
Joe the chorus.
We've no music to this because Oz said on the way home last night, can I do a song? I said, yeah, fair enough, what song do you want to sing? And they wanted to change the words, so bear with us, and we finished it along with Karen about 10 seconds before we come in here, so I thought there was to do. Go on, Brett.
People around me, they read it.
No.
People around me, they stop and stare. I don't know if they really care. All I really believe is the love that I receive. My Lord and only prayer will be you just accept for me, and it's not only make-believe. Now our only prayer is that someday you care about what's my dreams come true. Now and only you. I want to show I want my all for you. But don't lose to this.
We're not being we're going for it again. From the top. Alright, we've had it. We're going to go on from the top.
Nothing motion. People around me just stop and stare. I don't know if they really care. All I really believe is the love that I receive. My only prayer will be you just step forward for me, and it's not make-believe. My one only prayer is that someday you care my hopes, my dreams come true. Lots of thoughts, plans, things that I can do. My life I want to control. I want a word for all. My only prayer will be you just accept it for me, and it's not make believe. I know what I want to do. I want to change the beat, and you. It would give me such a buzz if we could all just be us. My only prayer would be you just accept for me. You just.
My only prayer will be again.
My only prayer would be you just accept me for me. And it's not make believe.
Take that can do it, tells you can.
There's some music in the background.
It was about time when you got put in.
That was great.
We'll put it to music, can't we?
Yeah.
Put it on the stage. It's brilliant, won't it?
Okay.
Mr. Plumbean lived on a street where all the houses were the same. He liked it that way. So did everybody else on Mr. Plumbean's street. This is a neat street, they'd say. Then one day, a seagull flew over Mr. Plumbean's house. He was carrying a can of bright orange paint. No one knows why. And he dropped the can, no one knows why, right over Mr. Plumbean's house. It made a big orange splot on Mr. Plumbean's house. Oh, too bad, everybody said. Mr. Plumbean will have to paint his house again. I suppose I will, said Mr. Plumbean. But he didn't paint his house right away. He looked at the big orange splot for a long, long time. Then he went about his business. The neighbours got tired of seeing that big orange splot. Someone said, Mr. Plumbean, we wish you'd get around to painting your house. Okay, said Mr. Plumbean. He got some blue paint and some white paint, and that night he got busy. He painted at night because it was cooler. When the paint was gone, the roof was blue, the walls were white, and the big orange splot was still there. Then he got some more paint. He got red paint, yellow paint, green paint, and purple paint. In the morning, the other people on the street came out of their houses. Their houses were all the same, but Mr. Plumbean's house was like a rainbow. It was like a jungle. It was like an explosion. There was a big orange splot, and there were little orange splots. There were stripes. There were pictures of elephants and lions and pretty girls and steam shovels. The people said, Plumbean has popped his cork, he's flipped his wig, he's blown his stack, he's dropped his stopper. They went away muttering. That day, Mr. Plumbean brought carpenter's tools. That night he built a tower on top of his roof. And he painted a clock on the tower. Next day the people said Plumbean has gushed his mush, he's lost his marbles and slipped his hawser. They decided they'd pretend not to notice. That very night Mr. Plumbean got a truck full of green things. He planted trees, baobabs from thorn bushes, onions and frangipani, and in the morning he bought a hammock and an alligator. When the other people came out of their houses, they saw Mr. Plumbean swinging in a hammock between two palms. They saw an alligator lying in the grass. Mr. Plumbeam was drinking lemonade. He wasn't actually. Plumbeam has gone too far. This used to be a neat street. Plumbeam, what have you done to your house? The people shouted. My house is me and I am it. My house is where I like to be and it looks like all my dreams, Mr. Plumbeam said. The people went away. They asked the man who lived next door to Mr. Plumbeam to go and have a talk with him. Tell him that we all liked it here before he changed his house. Tell him that his house has to be the same as ours so we can have a neat street. The man went to see Mr. Plumbeam that evening. They sat under the palm trees drinking lemonade and talking for a long time. Early the next morning, the man went out to get lumber and rope and nails and paint. And then the people came out of their houses and they saw a red and yellow ship next door to the house of Mr. Plumbeam. What the hell have you done to your house? They shouted at the man. My house is me and I am it. My house is where I like to be and it looks like all my dreams, said the man, who had always loved ships. He's just like Plumbeam, the people said. He's got bees in his bonnets, bats in his belfry and knots in his noodle. Then, one by one, they went to see Mr. Plumbeam late at night. They would sit under the palm trees, drink lemonade and talk about their dreams. And then, when anybody ever visited Mr. Plumbeam's house, the very next day that person would set about changing his own house to fit his own dreams. Whenever a stranger came to the street of Mr. Plumbeam and his neighbours, the stranger would say, "This is not a neat street." Then all the people would say, "Our street is us, and we are it. Our street is where we like to be, and it looks like all our dreams." I think the world is much better today than it was 5 years ago. How can you say that? Don't you ever read the papers? Don't you ever listen to the radio? How can you stand there and tell me it's a better world now? Because I'm in it now. Well, folks, we're in it now. Good luck. Make it a better world. We need to do it together. Thank you for coming.